Hello and welcome back to episode number 5 of Preston Does a Podcast. In today's episode, I will be reading and reviewing the Declaration of Independence. This is, of course, my Penguin Civics Classic Edition, annotated by Richard Beeman. I will omit the annotations and only be reading the Declaration as it is public domain, so property of the public. So I'll be reading it in its entirety, so if you've never heard it before, or maybe you haven't heard it in a long time, this will be a great episode for you. If this isn't exactly the type of thing that floats your boat, I apologize, but I'm very excited to read this and go over it with you guys. So, yeah. Before we get started, a little bit of background. I'm sure everybody has a pretty good idea of where the Declaration of Independence came from, but nonetheless, I'll go over a few facts here. It was written by Thomas Jefferson in 1776. And it was reviewed and signed by the Continental Congress, delivered to the King and the English Parliament, declaring the independence of the United States of America. The Founding Fathers did not make this decision lightly, and there was a great many infringements made upon the people of the United States by the English government that caused them to finally declare their independence and led to the document and the nation that we have today. So, without further ado, I will be reading the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers for the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be charged for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So, up till this point, essentially up to this point, Thomas Jefferson is laying down the case for America, stepping away from the English government. He's communicating that this is not a decision that has been taken lightly, but it's a decision that they must make in order to preserve the rights of the people who live in the colonies. This is a list of grievances that have compelled the American people to separation from Great Britain. Number 1, he has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Number 2, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation until his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. Number 3, he has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. Number 4, he has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Number 5, He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing him with many firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. Number 6. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. Number 7. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. Number 8. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. Number 9. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. Number 10. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Number 11. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Number 12. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Number 13. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Number 14. For quartering large bodies of troops among us. Number 15. For protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. Number 16. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Number 17. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. Number 18. For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. Number 19. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for our pretended offenses. Number 20. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries, so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. Number 21. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. Number 22. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Number 23. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. Number 24. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. Number 25. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with the circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Number 26. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. Number 27. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Thomas Jefferson ramps up his tone as we reach into the later grievances and creates more and more dramatic accusations against the king and his parliament. So the American people are very upset. They've been trampled on, stepped on by the English government. They're kind of trying to form their own legislative powers because they've been left across the sea and they're not getting much help from England. And the king, of course, steps in, and his form of government is the rule above all, and this is hindering the American people from creating a government that works for them. In grievance number 27, Thomas Jefferson seems to blame the king for the violence incited between the Native Americans and the American colonists. Anybody who knows their history will know that this is not entirely the case. It's likely that Thomas Jefferson wrote these words in order to bring unity to the colonies, finding another common enemy that binds them together. However, did it need to be said? Did Thomas Jefferson have to say that? No. Does it reveal a lot more about Thomas Jefferson than it does America as a nation? Absolutely. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So that's the Declaration of Independence. If you had access to my Google search history, you would see just the endless number of words that I searched to try to understand and make sense of this document in my own head. Thankfully, I have Richard Beeman. It's not that it doesn't make sense. It's not that it doesn't convey the right idea. It does, but it's so well written and it's so precise in its language that when you don't know every single word involved in the writing, it's difficult to grasp its concepts. Before we move forward, let me go ahead and read you guys the 56 delegates that signed this document. We have from Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. From North Carolina, William Hopper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. In South Carolina, Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., and Arthur Middleton. In Massachusetts, John Hancock. In Maryland, we have Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. In Virginia, we have George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, and Carter Braxton. In Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Claimer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. In Delaware, we have Caesar Rodney, George Reed, and Thomas McKean. In New York, we have William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, and Lewis Morris. In New Jersey, we have Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, and Abraham Clark. In New Hampshire, we have Josiah Bartlett and William Whipple. In Massachusetts, we have Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Paine, and Elbridge Gerry. In Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins and William Ellery. In Connecticut, Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, and Oliver Walcott. And in New Hampshire, all by himself, alone, but why is it listed twice? Matthew Thornton. Why was he late to the party? Oh, very interesting. So the last one, New Hampshire, Matthew Thornton. So we already talked about New Hampshire. Apparently, Matthew Thornton came in afterwards and signed. And under this document, the founding fathers and the rest of the nation went to war with Great Britain to declare their independence. The fact that I escaped high school and the institution of education without understanding and appreciating this document to its fullest is hopefully an error on my own part. However, now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, I'm able to go back and review this document. The American people were very disgruntled by the treatment they were receiving from the monarch all the way across the ocean and didn't really see how His Majesty should have jurisdiction over their lives across the sea. Putting this document into its historical context and looking at the ways in which the king had treaded upon the rights of the American colonists is invaluable in understanding this document and understanding America as a nation. The founding fathers did not make this declaration lightly. They thought long and hard over the consequences of their actions and ultimately were unsure of the direction that this new government would take. This document laid out the structure for the government of the United States moving forward, and yet after the war, there was a great deal of work to be done, and that's when we saw the Constitution drafted. So, with that being said, let me know what you guys think about the Declaration of Independence. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and let me know if you've read it before. Maybe this was your first time hearing it. What did you think? I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode of Preston Does a Podcast, where I read the Declaration of Independence. Join me next week for yet another episode, and in the meantime, keep reading, keep asking questions, and have a great rest of your day. What do you think?